Oh.
Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about potentially injurious plants, those that are a hazard to us in the garden situation. I'm going to start with the group that possess prickles. Prickles and thorns. These are the type of plants that can cause us puncture wounds, such as a rose as a classic point. Our recurved, strong prickles, they can puncture, they can scratch and they can rip our skin. So if we are working with plants that have prickles, we need to wear the correct PPE. Not just a pair of light gardening gloves that the prickles can go through, but strong gardening gloves that have got really good leather protection that you can handle those plants with easily. There we go, you can see how they can latch on if that was your skin. Really do make sure you dress appropriately when you work with these plants. Always be prepared to wear goggles or the safety glasses that are properly wrapped round, so when you're working within that plant, none of those prickles or sharp points can get round the signs and cause eye injury as well. So the plants with prickles actually let you know that you've got them. You can see them. We can see a rose has prickles, a bramble, a berberis. But it's not just our woody plants that possess prickles. Many of our herbaceous plants do as well, such as the thistles. We have them as garden weeds. There's a biennial, there's a teasel there with amazingly sharp prickles on under those stems. So some of our herbaceous plants have prickles. It's not just thorny prickles. Our evergreens often have prickly leaves, the holly, some berberises and mahonias. So also bear in mind, if you're weeding underneath a plant with prickly leaves, those prickles become in the soil, so you need to wear gardening gloves when weeding underneath prickly plants. In among the prickles that can harm us, we also have blades, such as grass blades that can do paper cut, but spears. Look at the spears on there, and almost saw cuts as well up the sides. They can lacerate a leg, so wear trousers when you're working in among these plants. Don't run your hands along the edges of grasses. Keep gloves on. This is an agave. The camera person just said, what is it? This is an agave. It's not frost hardy, but isn't it a fantastic plant? But I have been punctured by one of these, planted on a corner in a pot, walking past with a pair of shorts on, and an incredible puncture in there. If you do get a puncture or a wound, practice good hygiene. Stop working, get that wound cleaned up and a plaster on it before you start again, because wounds can lead to infection and that can be a serious issue. So moving on from our prickly plants, we're going to move to those that have fine irritant hairs. When you get in among plants with fine irritant hairs, it sometimes feels that they just have very, very small prickles. So you do need to dress accordingly. I'm going to put on my slightly finer gardening gloves to handle these. But the area that I would also advise you to keep covered is this. We often have short-sleeved stuff on in the summer. It's this area, sleeves roll up. This area is the bit that often gets affected. So just as if you were pruning a rose, you would wear a reasonable covering, a good strong jacket. When you're working with plants with irritant hairs, make sure your skin is actually covered up. You've got gloves on. So the first stinging plant, hairy plant we'll look at is the stinging nettle. Luckily in Britain we only have one stinging plant. Nettles have very, very fine hairs, and when you get in among those, they inject histamine and an acid into your skin and you get a red blotch and itchy, and I'm sure you've all had a nettle sting. They're the obvious ones to avoid. But we have many other plants in the garden with fine irritant hairs. They don't sting, but they're an irritant. Goosegrass or sticky willy or cleavers, I'm sure you're familiar with that weed. It has many fine hairs on it, and if you are weeding through it, you will get small scratches on your arm. That will happen to anybody. But many people, myself included, are allergic to this plant as well. So when I get those fine scratches, they come up into a really serious red sort of welt that is itchy and really quite hard to deal with. So I always make sure I'm covered up when I'm weeding out the sticky willy. Now we also have things like the comfrey, it's wilted now in the sunshine, but if you've been making comfrey tea, and we've been making stinging nettle tea to feed the plants, comfrey tea as well. Comfrey, many of the borage family, all the comfreys have these very, very fine hairs, and they are a serious irritant. They don't just leave a little scratch, they come off and come into your skin and leave a very itchy, prickly, and even if you wash, it doesn't come off. Very horrible to be in among, so keep yourself covered up. Now, that moves us on to two sort of separate parts of our irritant hairs. Hogweed, this is our native hogweed. I tried to find the umbel that was left, but look, it's disintegrated. But our native hogweed, it's got irritant hairs. But it also has an additional problem, that it has sap that is phototoxic. So if you get the sap of the hogweed onto your skin, it has a phototoxic effect, meaning the sunshine reacts with that sap and makes the matters worse. So you get sort of blisters, itchy, red scratching. I've had really big bubble blisters come up with a hogweed. When it heals, you can have a discoloration or pigmentation on your skin, and that area of skin can be allergic to sunlight, photosensitive for many months, if not years. So that's our native hogweed. So if you're strimming through it, make sure you've got the full protective kit on it. Our native hogweed, but I'm sure you've all heard of the giant hogweed, which often comes to attention because it almost hospitalises people.
Halfway through.
Halfway through. That's my camera person going, don't frighten them, don't talk too much about too many of them. So our hogweeds, big hogweeds, the giant one, that has a phytotoxic sap as well. So many plants have more than one defence mechanism, because the reason why they're potentially hazardous to us as gardeners, they're simply trying not to be eaten by herbivores. Their defence mechanism. It brings us to another point about these irritant hairs. The phlomis there has very fine hairs on it. They don't seem to be much of an irritant as a fresh plant, but if you're chopping down autumn foliage, those fine hairs detach and come into the air, and they become fine leaf particulates that when you breathe in can become an irritant. So that is when you actually, in your PPE, you add in masks, because some plants do give off fine leaf particulates that get into the air and affect us. So a dust mask. Now, a plant we don't have here is Fremontodendron californicum. This has very, very fine hairs that detach, and when you prune it, you need to make sure you have a mask, because that will irritate the mucous membrane, irritate eyes and so on. So you need goggles on. The one that we're most commonly going to get in among as gardeners is ivy. Ivy doesn't appear to be hairy, but when worked in among, it actually gives off leaf particulates that you can't even see. It doesn't look dusty, but it gives off particulates into the air that can cause tickly cough, and you might think, oh, I've got a bit of a dry cough, and that might be it. But for other people who are more allergic to it, it affects the mucous membrane, it affects the eyes. Your eyes can swell up, and it can swell up the breathing in here and get down into here and actually cause pulmonary problems as well. So when plants get up into the air, we need to protect ourselves. We're designed to breathe clean air, so any dust, any leaf particulates, use the correct PPE to take care of yourself. So keeping that in mind, thinking of the saps and keeping those problems, let's look at the group of plants that have irritant saps. The one you'll come across most often in the garden, because they are fantastic garden plants, are the euphorbias. So I've got 3 different euphorbias in here, and I'm hoping that even though they've been picked for a little while, that when I get my pruners out, that I'll be able to show you that it has the white sap coming there. And I'm sure you will have come across the white sap of euphorbias. So that white milky sap is a skin irritant. Now you can get that onto your skin, and sometimes you may be fine. But please, please do just wear protective gloves and cover your skin, because you might be fine once, but the majority of people, this can cause anything from mild irritation to blistering to intense pain from that blistering. And many of the euphorbias, if you get sun on that sap, they also have a phytotoxic effect, so it is heightened. So you may get a little bit on you on a dull day and you may be fine, but on a sunny day you can have serious problems. It is an incredible eye irritant. So if you are working with euphorbia, make sure you keep your eyes covered. If you get that in your eye, it can cause temporary blindness. You can be hospitalised from euphorbia sap. There are other plants in the category with sap. The fig, our native fig, has irritant sap, and there are a few others as well. but euphorbia are the one you're going to most come across in the garden situation. So dress accordingly, cover the skin, make sure your eyes are covered as well. And our last group is sometimes the group people get most worried about, is that our group of poisonous plants. Now as a gardener, probably the poisonous plants are the least of the problems to us, because as long as we garden sensibly, wear good clothing, keep our hands covered, and practice good hygiene, washing our hands before we eat, we should be fine. Poisoning comes in through accidental poisoning, really. We've got things like rhubarb, where we have an edible stem but a poisonous leaf, accidental poisoning. We have things like the actia that we can see here has got some berries set. So if those berries turn red in the autumn, they look incredibly delicious. So children are often drawn to berries and eat them mistakenly thinking they're an edible food. Other poisonings occur when bulbs are stored. An amaryllis bulb might be stored next to onions, and the amaryllis is poisonous, an onion is edible. We have got plants like the hellebore, which is a poisonous plant, but if we are in among it a lot and working with it, we can actually get contact dermatitis from being in among it. And our most poisonous plant is aconitum, the monk's hood, and we get occupational dermatitis occurring from that because it's a popular florist's flower, and it's so poisonous that we can absorb the poison through the skin. So again, just simply wearing gloves is the way forward. We've got many poisonous plants. The trick is you eat edible plants and you practice good hygiene. Don't eat anything you don't know about. Many of our poisonous plants, tobacco and opium poppies and digitalis, are connected to the medical usage as well. So a fascinating group of plants. Don't be scared of them. Wear the correct PPE and look after yourself. And don't fall over the clipboard. Thank you.
Okay.